And yeah, I thought just jump right in, introduce everybody. So thank you, Nuha, for doing this. So I'm just working through the list. So there's Robert Bailey, technical designer at Tilting Point Wicked Realm Games. Matthew Barry, software programmer at Epic Games, Fortnite. Colin Friday, associate producer with Epic Games, also Fortnite. And Barrington Campbell, technical artist with Unity Technologies. Some of you may have actually...
Wow, thanks for forgetting me, Dave.
Oh, Jinjin.
Thanks.
Sorry. Oh, there it is. Sorry, Jinjin. Excuse me.
All right,
Jinjin and I work together in many open houses.
Bye,
some
everyone.
Of you, sorry about that. Some of you took classes with me, some maybe not. Is anyone here from before when I was a director? I think so. You're number 7. So why don't we just jump right in? So we had some questions to get things started. So I thought I'll throw one question out and then see if the audience wants to jump in. There's always this thing too. It's like, if you feel like the question's been answered, it's okay to say, hey, let's go on to another question. So we, sometimes people we may get stuck on one question. So first one, how long did it take you to find work after graduation? And what was the job search process like? And because I mixed Jinjin, let's start with her.
They, them, but yeah, so I started applying for jobs, I guess sort of the summer between junior and senior year. And then it was kind of with the pandemic and stuff, it was really hard to hear back from people, but I managed to get my job in March-ish. So that was my timeline.
Others want to jump in?
I can go next. For me specifically, I started looking for jobs around my I would say actually sophomore year. So I got my first internship between sophomore and junior year. And then after I completed that internship, I immediately started looking for other jobs using the experience that I got from my previous internship. That's when I got the offer to come and intern at Unity. That would be what, my between junior and senior year? Yep, so the summer of my junior year, I got that offer. And then from there, basically after the internship, a lot of companies, especially during your junior year, you might get an offer to come back as a full-time. So for me, that's what happened. So I was lucky enough that at my senior year, I really didn't have to spend a lot of time looking for jobs. But I learned a ton from sophomore year, even from freshman year, looking for jobs all the way up to that junior year. And the process was not easy. It was very difficult, especially if you're a freshman or sophomore looking for an internship. A lot of companies are looking to hire students with more experience. So you kind of have to try to position yourself in ways that you could come off as more experienced. And a lot of the times you won't get the job, unfortunately, just because they're trying to hire people right outside of college, which isn't your fault. It's just how like the corporate world works. One thing that I would say that helped me a lot is at the same time, my roommate at the time, Matthew Barry, was also looking for jobs. So a lot of the times what we used to do is we used to find little tricks here and there that could help us push ourselves through that wall that you commonly hear when it comes to like the first-time recruiters. So things like reaching out to recruiters on LinkedIn or going to events to see if we can get our names out there. So having someone that you're also working together with, trying to get jobs, even though they might be different roles, is really beneficial because you can share information with each other.
Others want
Sorry,
to
that was a little bit long-winded.
Yeah,
that was long-winded.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Others that want to weigh in on their job search experience. Did anyone spend a lot of time searching?
I pivoted a bit. So I was a grad student. I did the BS-MS program. And so the last year of the MS program, I started my search around November-ish because I was waiting for a lot of my stuff to mature so that I could show off like my thesis and where that was in some form on my portfolio. Because that was the big reason I wanted to do the BS-MS, was to be able to have more things to show. And so I started a little bit slowly in November and December of the year I graduated. And then that ramped up back around January and February as like I planned to go to GDC. So trying to get a bunch more things in order. And also at that point, a lot of my projects had matured enough so I could show or share or demonstrate them a lot more actively. And so that came around in about March. I had been hearing nothing back, either getting ghosted or like getting rejected. Like I was lucky to get a rejection within a month. Like it was super slow, and that sucks to have happen. And then all of a sudden in March, I get late March, I get two companies that are both like aggressively coming after me. One was a bit faster, one was slower. And I moved through those, it was like 3 or 4 week interview process through April. Ended up having to make a decision during HVZ week while I was running that game. So I would advise not making decisions on 3 hours of sleep. I'm happy with the one I made, but just like keep that in mind when you're doing tests and such. And then I got my start date to be 2 weeks after, and that's when I started at Disruptive Beam immediately upon graduating, pretty much. I just came out of school, moved to Marlboro, and started work. But it was a long time, and like the year before, I've been looking for an internship, and all of my 4th year at school, I got just rejections. Like I spent a year getting rejections, and so like that sucks. You have to push through it. And one of the things that helped me was just setting like I'm applying for 2 jobs this week. I'm applying and setting that milestone that I could cross off. And if like 3 months went by and I wasn't getting much, I was like, okay, let's go back to the portfolio. Let's change that. Let's go back to my cover letter. Let's go back to my resume. Something's not working on my end that I can change. And just continue to optimize that until that March of, I think March of 2019, where it was just like, okay, here we go.
Did any of the recruiters, or did you ask any recruiters for feedback? Sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes they won't. If you ask for feedback, I don't know if that happened to you.
My favorite was at a GDC when I asked her. I was just looking for resume advice. Like that was in 2018. I had decided, okay, I guess like an internship's not happening this year. I'm going to spend that year prepping for my last year of grad school, and I got it. I was asking recruiters just for feedback on my resume. I'm like, this hasn't been successful. Can you give me help? And they walked me through this entire thing of how I would never get hired. I was like, well, this is phenomenal feedback. It was just like, well, for yours, you're going to work at a small company, then you're going to leave them, and then you're going to do here. But until that, you should never talk to us. So, that doesn't seem helpful. And what I did was I reached out to friends who had graduated earlier. I reached out to alumni to kind of like temper some of that advice of like, hi, how did this happen? And I found more success reaching out to students that I knew and who had graduated than I really found reaching out to recruiters. I have found my way into a few professional industry discords and such, and other like Slacks and communications, and those have been helpful. I never found a ton of success with recruiters.
Interesting. Yeah, and then I didn't want to leave Colin out, so
yeah,
you want to weigh in on your experience?
So I think I had a very similar experience to Rob, in that my experience for the job search was primarily network driven, and not so much with recruiters. Production is a pretty niche thing at RIT. We don't have a lot of producers that have come out of the school, though there's a couple who have all actually worked at Epic at one point or another, or at least those that I know of.
My rule of thumb is about 1, maybe 2 producer entry-level production every graduating class. That seems to be about the number.
And the way that I was able to find my way through the job process is really reaching out to former students, and also reaching out to people who are currently in the role that I wanted to be in. I went to GDC twice, went to production talks, started talking to people, because I realized that the people in the industry who were doing what I wanted to do could give me better advice about how to get where I wanted to go than someone who's just purely looking at resumes. And if you have that personal touch and get to know people, they'll keep an eye out for you for positions. And it was actually Katie Teague, who was a former RIT IGM student, who got me my role at Epic. She knew the lead art producer here. and had spoke to him about, there's this kid that's interested in production at RIT. You should check him out. So just making those personal connections I found was really valuable for the job search.
For everybody here, my temptation is not everybody had the same kind of interviews, tech interviews, production interviews and whatnot, but is there one question that stood out at an interview, like that you had trouble with or something that you nailed? And it sort of gives a hint, like, connecting back to your education. So something that was really striking about that interview process somewhere along the way, maybe a negative one and maybe a positive one, perhaps something that helped you land the job. Anybody jump in? Maybe start with Colin this time because he ended.
Yeah.
Okay.
The one that was probably, I'd probably go with the most interesting as opposed to like hardest or easiest. It was like, how do you deal with tough personalities that you work with? Because I know as a student, that isn't always necessarily clear to you, is like, where's that colleague divide, and like, how do you deal with someone who you may not completely get along with? Because a lot of times I felt like in school projects, you're kind of encouraged to work with people that you know already and that you enjoy being around and stuff like that. And I thought that was a super challenging question for me, not having necessarily worked with a lot of people that, I didn't necessarily get along with. But the answer that I kind of came out of that with is, being cordial and respectful. And if you're working from that basis of personal respect for everybody you work with, you'll be able to get pretty far.
Other questions from people like that you encountered during the interviews?
I had a fun pair, one of which I flunked and one of which I nailed pretty well. So as a tech designer, I'm like a hybrid of programming, design, and kind of being able to facilitate and improve design pipelines while still doing some design authoring. And I mean, that's going to change studio from studio, but that's broadly what I was going to be doing at DisruptItMe. And one of my early phone interviews, I got it first. That was just like a resume walkover. And my second one was, hey, we want to get an idea of what your programming skills are like. And again, I'm doing this on like 3 hours of sleep, running a water pump at the same time, effectively. And I was going through the advanced like console programming course. And so I've been like focusing all on like memory management and like how many scan lines the Atari has and moving all of these things through. So a lot of super low level stuff. And I get asked, what's the difference between a struct and class? I had no, like, I knew the answer, but I couldn't vocalize it in any form. And I'm just like, I say something wrong. And bless his heart, the interviewer is like, oh, maybe this other thing, they're trying to walk me to water. And I am refusing to drink, but I know what they are on the memory bus. I'm like, well, so this is what this was allocated to heap, and it's this fast. So you're using it for this point. This other one's here, and it's like, yeah, but what's the difference between them? It's like how fast they get there. I can't tell you how to write it. And I'm like, there's another question, there's another few things, and I'm just like, I'm not hearing back. I'm done. I get a call back. They're like, this is great. Come on. And I think I just confused him at the level of like zero basic 101 knowledge and like actually articulating like CPU architecture. And then I had a design interview in person, and it was the last one of a big day of interviews. And it was the head of technology, and he was just like, okay, here's a problem from one of our projects, and designers want to do this thing. How do you make a tool for that a designer likes to use? And I'm paralyzed. I'm like, I'm not going to have to like write this out starting with a bracket. It's like, no, just talk it through. How will this look? Why do you make these decisions you do? And walking through it. And anytime I got to a stopping point, I'm like, yeah, I think that's good. He would throw a wrench at me. Just like, all right, but the designer wants to use a negative number. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That's what we would do. So I would do this. And he just kept throwing wrenches at me. And it hit a point where I was just like, all right, I need a minute. And realizing that you can take a minute in those interviews to go, especially if it's a back and forth, to go, I need a pause. You can cheat that on earlier ones by like taking a drink of water or like doing something else. But even in that back and forth, just going, no, I need to think about that for a second is perfectly okay. And I was able to come back at it with a better answer. And then when I talked to him after getting hired, he was like, yeah, it was because you kept explaining your thought process and going through this. And it Like, it didn't matter, like, can you code it? Because you could eventually code it. The idea is, did you know what you wanted to work for and work towards? And it was a fun question, even though it just kept being like, yeah, so they want to do it this way. Actually, everything needs to be inverted. We're changing theme entirely. How do you support that? And walking through that. And that also better prepared me for what I would be doing at the job when I started, of like, oh, okay, this is how we're like starting. This is how they're seeing my role. So yeah,
that's fantastic. Jinjin, there's a lot of game stuff, new media. For your interviews, is there anything that stood out?
I mean, nothing. Okay, so not specific to, I guess, my field individual. Like, this is something that they would ask anyone. But usually when you go into an interview, your mind is on, the role specifically, just that one. But the question that threw me off was like, where do you see yourself going in like 10 years? And that, like, I still don't have a clear answer for that, but that really made me stop and think about it. Like, okay, yeah, like if I get this role, then what? And that's still something I'm trying to figure out. So just, I guess
you didn't know the cliched answer. That's like your job.
Well, my interviewers were not in my field, so
okay.
could not say that.
That's
could not say that.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years in that seat asking these questions? Sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, just I guess thinking about that too, because like, yeah, like I think throughout what I'm realizing now, throughout high school, everyone's like, okay, next goal, college, and then college, okay, next goal, job, and then it's like, okay, now what? Like, you have to then go from there and like set your own goals, because you no longer have like a path that other people are telling you to walk down.
Others that remember their interview experiences, or go to the next question? Yeah, let's. So I see a question in chat from Kara. Do any of our audience members have a question before we move on? So yeah, this is kind of a good segue, because one of the things I'm always thinking about in administration and faculty and so forth, there's stuff that we think is valuable. There's stuff that industry thinks is valuable, and this, something like, I'll just borrow Kara's phrasing. What is one thing you've taken from your education at IT and applied to your current role? How did that transition happen? Did we help you? Start with Barrington.
Is it okay if I pass this question to someone else while I think about it?
Yeah. Matthew?
Yeah, I'll take it. And I'll call you out, Barry, because I would say working with you is probably like the biggest thing I took away. I mean, like, sure, you can study all the books and all that's good and great, especially like programming and all the syntax and whatever. But working with others, I mean, that's what you're going to be doing day to day, and building things out is probably like the biggest takeaway I had, especially when, Barrington and myself were presented opportunities to showcase those games at like GDC and the Intel Game Conference showcase. And those experiences I took the most away from than anything else, and just being able to build a game up and work with others, especially with other disciplines. And I know as we were leaving, RIT was getting even more into working with other departments within those disciplines, and Magic was doing really great stuff too. So that's probably the biggest takeaway that I had, was all those passion projects.
My answer is what Matt just said.
Colin, what do you think of that one?
For me, I think it's being able to think about a lot of things like a programmer, which is actually a pretty interesting take on the production side. I feel like being able to utilize a lot of even the lower level programming concepts that we learn at RIT, you start to realize that there are things that I do day to day that people have been doing for years and years that can be automated or, work through with a different mindset. And it just gives you a different avenue for problem solving, and talking to other people on teams.
Yeah, Rob, what do you think? The one thing you've taken from your education?
generally a lot of what Matthew and Colin are talking about, the ability to work on teams rapidly and move forward on stuff and communicate with people of different disciplines and learning a bunch of little things so that I couldn't implement, like, I took the audio class. I couldn't implement a WISE system. I always want to pronounce the first W. I couldn't implement that if I wanted to, but I can talk to our audio people about what I need in a more informed way that helps just speed along that conversation. And then I can help other people on my team and give them some of that vocabulary as well, just so everyone's a little bit easy. It just works a little bit easier for everything. And yeah, just having a lot of teams, a lot of disciplines, and that like soft aspect of so many good projects translates really well.
And Jinjin, before we get to the next question.
Yeah, I mean, similar answer to everybody, just collaboration with people in different fields, and like with new media specifically, it was really nice, like working with the new media designers, because now as a front end developer, like I'm one of the few developers that can actually communicate with designers and like understands the full design process. Like a lot of like our clients, they're kind of like, they think things can just get built like overnight, and being able to advocate as well of like, no, there's a process. Like there has to be user interviews and like user stories and wireframes and flowchart user flows, all of the process that goes into it. And that's all stuff I learned from the courses at RIT.
Yeah, I was telling the group that the alumni that are here, one of the reasons why it seems so zonked, I was on Zoom for 3.5 hours straight designing a game on the spreadsheet. You know, my military context, the military funding, and we were just going to jump right into, you know, the code. And it's like, look, for lack of a better word, how do we know we're not polishing a turd? It's like, do we know if this game works? So we shrunk it down, got it down to MVG, minimum viable game today, and it proved it works. Thank you for your tax dollars, by the way, everybody.
I also work with the government and can confirm they think that way.
It was mind-blowing for them. They just hadn't thought like this. Yeah, I see from Holly with with emphasis. How did you gear your coursework and portfolio towards the field you now work in? Who wants to go first? I've just been calling on people.
I can take that since I just spoke. So I knew pretty early that I wanted to be a front end developer. Like my second co-op really solidified that. So I figured out what technologies I wanted to work with. So like I really liked React. So I made sure when I had the freedom to, you know, choose the technologies to build projects, like I used React, I practiced that. I also wanted to be competent and familiar with the other technologies, which I know gets covered, like Vue gets covered. And then I tried to learn Angular at one of my other co-ops. So like I really tried to learn what the frameworks were that were like popular for front-end development, and then start building projects that use that so I could apply it later.
Just as a side note, when you're out there in industry, does anyone ever use the term new media?
No.
Sorry, this is on the recording. People are sitting there groaning. Dave, let it go. Sorry, I'm always asking this. All right. Others, who wants to grab the next? Gearing your coursework and portfolio. Who wants
I can talk a little bit about the coursework side of things, seeing that production doesn't really have the same portfolio requirements as a lot of the other disciplines. One of the things that was really beneficial to me in terms of gearing coursework is finding a professor who shares a similar interest to you, especially if it's in regards to like a niche discipline like audio development, or in my case, production. I was able to pair with Professor Gottlieb, and he was able to give me both independent study time and also find opportunities for me working on some of his research projects to kind of flex those production skills and get those learnings as part of my time at RIT.
Others.
From a design side, I realized that I didn't have a ton of digital things. I had a lot of physical artifacts that I could reference for design, but I didn't have things that had made that transition into digital space going to like my third year. So I worked with some friends and we extended a project. We ended up getting a co-op pretty early on in the co-op program to take that forward. We didn't finish it then, but we made the effort to keep going so that we'd have something that we could all point to as a designed thing. But then that's why I entered the BSMS program, was I wanted to be able to have a longer term project. But I really looked for, how do I get more projects in the digital space that I can show off? Because board games are great, but there can be a little bit of like a step in translation that if you're talking to designers, it might work great, but it's not always the designer looking at your portfolio site initially. It could be an HR person or something like that who just goes, oh, these are all board games. And so I took efforts to that. I looked at all of my extracurriculars. I was like, how can I adapt these? I've been making human versus zombies games for like 3 years. How can I translate those? Like, that's something. And worked through and drafted those. And then I also looked at doing independent studies. I'd fulfilled all like course stuff, and I had some free floating electives. And I was like, how can I do independent studies to just take that to the next thing, to go, here's a weakness in my portfolio. How do I get credit for it? And that led to a big systems effort, a big systems design spreadsheet that ended up being the thing that pushed my resume over the top for the job that I started with. And being able to just go like, yep, this is a hole, I want to fill it, and I want to get GPA points for it. So I talked to like all the design professors. I ended up doing a independent study with Professor David Simpkins and just took that through.
Barrington.
Yeah, I would say similar to what Robert and Colin brought up, independent studies was extremely beneficial. Another thing that was beneficial was actually taking courses outside of my college, so outside of Golisano. Especially if you're looking to be a technical artist, you want to have your hands in multiple different disciplines. And it's kind of hard for Golisano to do everything. So being able to go to other professors at, I don't know, like if you're taking 3D classes and yeah, exactly, SOFA and like all these other college, curricular courses, you can actually get a lot of experience from that, and you can branch out and work on different projects as well that are not specific to just games too. So that was extremely beneficial for me.
Yeah, so this sort of, every student goes through this. Sometimes alumni go, wait a minute, why wasn't that there when I was there? So game arts has an umbrella now. So in other words, it's now understood if an IGM student wants to interact with faculty, there's a portal. You don't have to leave IGM. There are ways to do so. Barrington was one of the students. And then before, Katie and others from before, Brian May, thinking back, it's Steve O and so forth. There's this legacy the alumni leave. And then, did I miss Matthew on this one? The gearing your coursework portfolio?
Sure, yeah. Something to add is that what I actually found the most useful for me, mostly through co-ops, was finding what I didn't like to do was more useful than what I did like to do. So for example, one co-op I was more geared toward like an engine programmer, which was fun, but it's not as like invigorating as gameplay programming to me. One time I was an animation tools programmer, which I hated. So I found those the most useful of like, okay, I don't like this. It was really good to try, especially like a co-op, you're in and out in like 3 or 4 months. So there's really no commitment in that sense in the long term. So just trying a bunch of stuff out. And I mean, games are evolving to the point where there's like a specialty in so many areas, like giving each one a try, even like during a game jam, super worth the time.
Yeah, and in fact, sometimes I've wondered the whole other conversation, if we could bring in alumni, all who are in gameplay programming roles, and just to hear how different each one of them actually is. How, it's a side question. How does the game industry interpret gameplay programming? Is it specific or is it a catch-all? Yeah, I don't know if this is something that you've encountered. It's a tough one. Let's grab Lucas's question. What does reaching out to recruiters look like? Just sending a LinkedIn message with your name and job interests, asking for resume feedback, something else. I reorganized my Zoom, so like, okay, I got everyone in the same row. The power of pin. So let's start with Robert, right to left from my window.
Yeah, I didn't do too much digital reaching out to recruiters. I took advantage of opportunities from like the honors college trips and such to like meet some in person and get some contact information that way. But I never used digital forums. I used GDC as a connecting point. I tried to talk to recruiters that visited the campus as well. But I never cold called. But a lot of it was like I tried to phrase it as like, "Hi, this is what I have. What feedback can you give me on this?" Because if I'm applying to it, that's already happened usually. But if like trying to like give something that like they could help me with then, like this is my resume. Do you have any tips or feedback? I really didn't use LinkedIn. It was a lot of just in person, taking advantage of the opportunities either at RIT or at various conferences, and just aggressively taking advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah, I had a student that at Age of Empires just reached out to somebody in LinkedIn out of the blue and ended up doing co-op there. Different stories. Colin, did you do LinkedIn or other kinds of recruiting?
I honestly did not really reach out to recruiters, but I feel like this kind of goes along with the question as far as like networking goes. It is one thing to be reaching out to recruiters for like feedback on your resume and stuff like that. But definitely if you are going to go more the networking route or talk to people who are in that role, that shouldn't be the thing that you necessarily lead off with. You should use that more of like a getting to know the person. And then once you build up a relationship with them, you can then ask them for that kind of feedback. But that just regular people in the role was kind of how I did my job searching. So I don't know if I have any reaching out to recruiter specific stuff.
So it's not like, hey, I see that you're in the game industry. Could you give me a job?
Yeah, exactly. That's definitely the impression that you want to avoid.
Does that happen to any of you? Someone says, hi, can I have a job?
I know when people start applying to co-ops for each school, because I get like one every 2 to 3 weeks minimum from like October through about February. And then they fall off, and then a big spike in May, and then they fall off. I'm only going to speak for myself in this, so this advice does not translate all the way. If someone sends me the nicest formatted 3 paragraphs with like a professional, hi, this is me, this is what I do, and I don't want to read it. If someone goes like, hi, this is my name, what is a tech designer at Wicked Realm Games? I'm a kid at RIT, and like my advisor told me to reach out. Can you answer that? Like, if you give me a question that fits in the notification, I'm infinitely more likely to reply. And that, like, I don't, if it's just like, what do you do? It's like, I have a LinkedIn page. You can see it. You're messaging me on LinkedIn. But when it comes down to like, for me, it's like, if a student's reaching out to me, I'm not going to give an aggressive cold shoulder, but like, give me a question that I can respond with. Give me something I can help you with. Don't like make the person you're asking carry that rest of the conversation. Because it's much easier to reply with nothing than to reply with feedback to an open question of like where did you roll? Or I see you did this thing. What was that like? Or I want to do something like this. I feel like that's so much more successful, especially if it's a cold call. And then you can develop more of that back and forth relationship. And then as Colin said, you can do like the, hey, would you mind giving me like a resume look over? Because if someone starts with that, I don't want to read it. If someone starts with a question I can answer, I can respond.
Yeah, Jinjin, did you have experience with recruiters, LinkedIn, that sort of thing?
So
Lucas's question.
the only time I talked in person to recruiters was at the career fair for my co-ops. And that was just, you walk up, stand in line, talk to them, be like, hi, give your little elevator pitch, and then you just, kind of go back and forth. A lot of times I found that the recruiters are actually carrying the conversation there because they were like, I've been saying this all day, but let me explain like what this company is and like what we do. But at Booz Allen, actually, as a consultant to get on new projects, it's almost like applying for a new job. And the way I would reach out, I give a short like intro, like, hi, I'm this. These are my skills, like my top skills. I saw this posting here. Do you have time to chat more about the details? So I think it's important. Don't necessarily directly ask like, can I get an interview? But like, can I learn more about the role, about the job? Like, let's just discuss and then go from there.
Yeah, and Oh, there was my brain. Sorry, my brain leap. Creative Industry Day as a tangent to the question. Sometimes our student Pandemic Creative Industry Day. It's changed. It's happening. It'll be virtual. Barrington, you must have gone to that. Jin, you would have gone to it. So did you have that? It's a different vibe. It's not a recruiting event per se, but did you have similar experiences talking to people? What it was like?
What I can remember, I mean, in those at like Creative Industry Day, it feels like a conversation. Just talking to them about like, here's what I've been doing, here's what I want to do. Like, do you have any advice? I think is kind of the gist of how creative industry tends to, at least for me. I don't know, Barry, if you've had other experiences.
Did you have, and then I'll come back to Lucas's question. Barrington.
Yeah, it was,
Creative Industry Day side note.
it was the exact same for me as it was for you, Jin. It was very open. Everyone was excited to help and, help students. It didn't feel like I was going there to sell myself to get a job. I felt like I was in a position where I could explain what I wanted to do, like Jin was saying, and get feedback and improve as someone who's trying to get into the industry. To go back to Lucas's question, I'll give some context with why I brought up LinkedIn. So, and this goes back to Matt and I, when we were looking for jobs, we used to come up with strategies to get our names in the door, to get our resume to the top of the pile. So one of the things we used to do, and we used to go on LinkedIn and we would kind of cold call recruiters. And we've gotten really good at it. We got so good at it, we could take someone's name, pair it up with like an email and email them. Like, it was pretty bad. I would not recommend doing this, but what I would recommend is after you submit a resume to a company, go on LinkedIn and look for a recruiter, especially if you're looking for an internship, like a university recruiter, and just send them a message saying, hey, my name is XYZ. I'm very excited for this opportunity. I recently applied to this job. Thank you for this opportunity. Like something as simple as that, right? And that alone will set you apart from the other applicants because you went one step above and beyond to get your name in the door. So that's why I brought it up, just for context.
And the thing about mailing people resumes, I still get this. We have the co-op class and we tell students not to do it. I get it. Resume 1. No, your name, something about you, something like, so this way, when if someone does save the file, it's not like 20 resume 1s. You'd be surprised. Oh, and please get rid of the high school stuff off your resume and cover letters. I'm still seeing that. Matt, your LinkedIn and other kind of, resume feedback stuff. Lucas's question.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Barry and I did a lot of funny stuff that I'm not really sure if any of it works, but the one thing I will say is once you get your foot in the door, like things really start to open up. It's just getting your foot in that door that can be quite difficult, and you have to probably get a little scrappy for. But I know that once I did get my foot in the door with Magic Leap, was my first co-op. You start working with people that are more in the games industry and the entertainment industry. And my lead, used to work at like Blizzard and Treyarch and all these other places. And he knows those people that he introduced me to, and it just kind of spider webs off. So then now you have all these connections that you can reach out to and make like a real relationship with. You don't just like, cold call these people and say, hey, I want a job. Can you hire me? It's very much like, I want to get to know you and what you do and that type of thing. That tends to work a lot better.
Yeah, Lindsay and her team did a fantastic job. Shout out to Lindsay. There's a question that she suggested. With the position you're currently in, did you always see yourself in this position? And how did you end up in it? Barrington was in one of my classes once, offered lots of constructive feedback. It's like, so let's start with Barrington. Like, yeah, did you see yourself heading in this direction?
Starting out, I did not. I would say freshman, sophomore year, I honestly didn't know what I wanted to do. A lot of the common choices that I saw other students going towards was being a gameplay programmer, which I feel like RIT, especially IGM, sets you up very well for that position. But once I would say late sophomore year came around, maybe mid sophomore year, I started trying out different things with like different projects, working with different people. And that's where I started to find that I had certain specialties that I really enjoyed working with. And some things that set me apart from, other students per se. So when I was starting, I did not expect to be a technical artist, but once I started playing around and trying different passion projects and working with others, I started to see that the role of a technical artist is where I wanted to be. So I am situated now in a position of that's where I saw myself, but moving forward, I'm actually thinking of possibly going towards the engineering route. So keep in mind that even though you might think you want to be in position A, that can always change, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I think we'll finish this question, then go to the next one. Matt, did you see yourself ending up this? Where did you start? How did you end up here?
Yeah, I kind of did in a lot of ways. Was like the work I'm doing right now on Fortnite is, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, I'd say that's perfect. But like the road to get here was very windy and confusing, and I don't know. I would have never seen it coming, but I'm extremely grateful for all the things that I was given the opportunity to do. When I first started on in Fortnite, I was all UI. I was a UI engineer, and then slowly transitioned into touching a lot of systems. And now I kind of touch basically everything, more of like a full stack. And that's actually where I kind of like to be, is doing bits of everything. Otherwise, I can kind of get a little bit bored. So I didn't see that part of it. I never thought I would like enjoy making UI or doing anything else that I might do on a day-to-day. So yeah.
Jin, same question. Did you see yourself in this direction? I think you applied directly into new media too, didn't you?
No, so I applied originally to game design.
Oh, so you were in
switched during accepted students. Yeah, switched on accepted students day. But I knew kind of what I wanted to do. I just didn't know there was a name for it. Like I didn't know anything about, front end, back end, full stack developer. I didn't know any of that, but I knew vaguely what I wanted to do. Did I know that I would be working for the government and be a consultant? No. Did I know what that entailed when I got to my job? Also no, but here I am. But yeah, so I mean, I had a vague idea, but I didn't quite know where that would be, like what kind of company it would be at. I was very open, but as long as I was doing just this creative coding, I guess you could call it, that's where I knew I wanted to be.
One of my dreams is that we create a course called Creative Coding, Cinder, processing, for open frameworks, and so forth. Would love, I keep hoping, maybe when I'm done with the world of directorhood, maybe I'll tackle that. But yeah, creative coding, the field. So yeah, definitely a term. Colin, same idea.
No, definitely not originally. I kind of came into RIT with like, I want to do the game dev as the idea of like what I wanted to do originally. And kind of over the course of the 4 years, I started to understand better that like I wasn't necessarily in group projects and stuff worried as much about what the exact thing that we were building. It's the process of us building it and the plan of us building it that really engaged me, and like, how do we make things better for the next project and stuff like that. And that's what really drove me towards project management and production, was like, I started to realize that the owner of the plan is not necessarily, on the creative side. It's someone who helps the creative side bring everything together and make sure it all gets done and make sure that everybody's happy and on the same page and stuff like that. And I just ended up feeling a lot of fulfillment from like getting people to come to consensus in meetings and running quick meetings that didn't last hours and hours and hours. talking about the same topic and having people arrive at like decisions. And that's why I got interested in production.
So one of the adjuncts, if anyone here is in IGME 102 this semester, August Zinzer did actually have that creative role in the game industry, a creative developer whose job it was to generate ideas. It exists. Not any, and it turned out to be a miserable job. You got everyone who believes they could have that job, and then the owner, it's like, why aren't your things making millions of dollars? It's very stressful. Actually, so we did hire somebody who was in a creative director role from the game industry. And Rob, same question before we move on to the next one.
Yeah, I came into the RIT wanting to be a designer, and I kind of just sampled a bunch of the various ideas of what it would be. I didn't really know what a tech designer was until I started applying to jobs late in my RIT career and seeing that role pop up and feeling that I fulfilled it pretty well. I spent a lot of time in level design. I really wanted to be a level designer, but I wasn't getting success on that, so I changed my job search. And I was like, okay, I'll be happy with this tech design role. And within like 3 months of starting, I was doing something really entirely different. The title that you have doesn't always mean what you're doing day to day, particularly on a smaller to medium-sized company. And over the past like 2.5 years, I've been doing like every type of design. I've done systems, I did content for an extended period of time. I did not know that memorizing like the Star Trek wiki would be a skill I would need, and it was. But going through all of those and kind of getting to sample a lot, and my current role on my current project, like I'm really excited for what I'm doing. And some of it was being in the right place at the right time, and some of it was just having a nexus of knowledge and being willing to try and sample everything. And working with my boss to go like, yeah, I like that task, I hated that task, like let's just keep narrowing and narrowing as I kept experimenting as a designer.
Thank you. So I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Please, forgive. Sorry if I got this wrong. Jabricia or Jabrikia. For everyone who's part of a minority or underrepresented group, how hard was it to get into the industry? Did you find any pushback because of the group you're part of?
I can take this question. As someone who's part of the LGBTQ community, I didn't find my identity as being anything that like made it hard for me to get into the industry. Like that was fine. I think the one thing that, you have to think about that some other people might not is like making sure you ask about diversity and like finding out if there are resources at the company that will like for other people who might identify in the same community as you, like making sure that there are people and you're not alone, and like knowing that that's accepted. That's just something I think that you would have to think about that someone else might not. And because of that, like I didn't find any pushback at any of the companies I like co-opted and now I'm working at, because I made sure it was an accepting place.
Yeah, for me, in terms of like the Black community, also ditto what Jin said. Like, biggest thing, and I learned later on, is having a resource group is extremely beneficial. That you can feel comfortable talking with and sharing your experience. Things that you might not be as open to sharing with like the generic HR person. I don't remember ever really feeling or finding myself in a position where a company is like pushing back. But yeah.
Yeah, it's I have a contact we're still working with career services on. Protagonist Games, they have sort of different companies that they're all working with. And one of the versions of the company for Protagonist, they all have multi-ethnic backgrounds, across different parents. The leadership team is all males, but they have multiple intersectionality, and they've been sort of reaching out and having some success with IGM, high power folks out there. Let's see if there aren't questions from the audience. I've got more here. Yeah, it's, I'm going to jump around a little bit. What is life outside of work? So one of the things about faculty members, like someone like me, the amount of time I spent out in the real world was very little. I got my bachelor's, my master's, my PhD. I had one summer when I worked for the DOT. And I had 3 summers where I worked for the Air Force Research Lab, but for the most part, I've just stayed in school my whole life. So sometimes I look at, ask our students like, what's it like out there? How do you balance your life? Do you get time for things? I don't know, with the, I guess, who wants to go first on this one? Like, I hope the answer isn't what life.
I can go first with this one. I'm gonna look a bit more pre-pandemic with it, because right now there's not a lot of going out there, but just life outside of school is kind of a different vibe entirely. When the nice things is you don't necessarily have homework and you don't need to be constantly working on maybe like side projects unless you're passionate about that. But that being said, like an important thing that I've struggled with even personally is finding work-life balance. A lot of times I feel like when you're in college, you're always thinking about, these are my classes, this is my workload, that kind of stuff. And it can be very easy to fall into, well, I should be putting all that time I was putting towards college into work now. And I should be pulling extra hours, and I should keep working on a project, because I want to, make it super successful and stuff like that. And just being able to take that and realize now that you're out of college, like you're being paid for your time. So your time is valued in that manner rather than you needing to push to put extra credit in there and stuff like that. Like you've sold yourself at this point to a company. Like they hired you. You don't need to continue necessarily putting in like extra time to make things extra special. And you need to make sure that you take some of that time back to live a healthy lifestyle, whether it's exercising or playing sports or just going out and hang out with people, watching movies. That becomes really important, and you have to manage it more because it won't necessarily be told to you like this is when you're supposed to leave now and stuff like that.
Others that want to grab the what is life like? Yeah, I haven't mentioned the pandemic, a little bit, but life like be pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, would you anticipate? How do you balance all this?
I can. Okay. When I Disruptive Being, we were a pretty social office. Like there were a lot of things, various activities that people did together, and like that. Some of them were in the office, which kind of helped with like maybe I should go home because the D&D campaign's starting over there, so no one's going to care if I go and leave. Like it's 5:30, it's okay. Some of that, and so there were a lot of things facilitated at the office. But one thing that I didn't really think about before I moved to Massachusetts was like, where am I going to be doing stuff outside of work? Because I think it's really important to have a social network outside of just your work, because otherwise you can't ever really leave it. You take it with you to like your club sport, you take it with you everywhere. So being able to have something out, and about the time I was comfortable, I like settled and was like, yeah, let's start looking for stuff. The world shuts down. But like, so then like I didn't even have like work life stuff and get-togethers, and I looked online of hanging out with friends and like being more active in some online communities that I'd looked in for a long time, just to try and make sure that I kept that social connection. And also, oh yeah, I'm reconnecting with a bunch of people that aren't my coworkers, so I can say different things or like be different, or just not have to worry about it. Like, and I think that's a huge thing. And I've been looking at like, I'm probably going to move in the next few months, because where I'm at, like it's work from home. We're like a full remote setup right now. I can now take that advantage to move and not worry about ruining my commute and going to some place that's going to have a few more activities for me, a few more things that I can look to do. And I think that's something that's important that often you forget about in your job search. It doesn't just matter getting that job. Are you going to be happy in that location? Because even if you love the people, you have to go home eventually. And looking at that is a thing that I think is really valuable to look at. Maybe you have a 20-minute commute instead of 10 minutes, but you're close to all these clubs and stuff that you really value.
And Jinjin.
I was thinking that also, like, if you make really great friendships at RIT, which I'm sure you have by now, make sure you, like, if you're all graduating at the same time, like, have a plan, I guess, of like, because all of my friends, we all ended up in very different places, but we made sure that we're like, let's keep in touch, let's have a game night, let's make a plan to visit each other, like, just find ways to stay in touch, because like you go from seeing them, I guess, every single day to not seeing them again for months at a time, maybe even years. So making sure you find ways to like hold on to those friendships is really important. And yeah, and then finding activities to do around where you are, super important to just de-stress, get away. Most people are now working from home, so like just being able to step outside your house, apartment, wherever you are. I know I've been doing CrossFit. I've been an athlete my whole life. And then also what you don't realize is like you're now an adult. So sometimes some people, their injuries have caught up to them and they have to go to the chiropractor and PT weekly. So
because what's happening is like, at some point you're going to, if you reach your 50s, you'll, keep going.
So, I mean, yeah, just finding things to do that aren't sitting at your computer is really important for like your overall well-being, mental health, physical health. Yeah.
And Matt.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the only thing I would add is to get like a standing desk. That's really nice. I really, that's like my best recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, when I left, not, would you believe, when, like when I was a sage, not everyone had email. So there's some people just lost to the depth of time. I don't know where they are, gone. So email, you have email. It lives on a long time. And Barrington.
I also don't have much to add.
Actually, I'll throw something. You've stayed in contact through the, our alumni network. That's been fantastic, actually.
Yeah, that helps a lot. I would say it's kind of like what Jinjin was bringing up. Remembering like who you've been around through RIT and keeping in contact is really nice and beneficial. I'm trying to think if there's anything specific to work-life balance. Pandemic is it's a whole different, like, I don't want to say issue, but a whole different situation in itself. Before post-pandemic, everything like Colin was saying is like perfect. You basically have to like ramp that up 100 times fold in pandemic. A lot of that is because you don't get those like random serendipitous experiences when you're at work where you're like, get up and go get water and talk to people, or you go to the bathroom, or you go get a snack, which in hindsight, you really don't notice that makes a huge impact to your body and how you feel emotionally and just, physical health. So I would say, as a little tip, try to actually add that to your day-to-day routine. Like maybe you get up and go get a snack from your fridge, or you message someone on Slack and say, oh, let's do 10 push-ups. I don't know who does that, but stuff like that could be kind of serendipitous and add that excitement and get you out of your seat and moving again.
That's a great idea. What I did, I built this is not a standing desk. I took, ever since I was in college, I took scrap lumber with me. It's been moving from apartment to apartment, then house to house. And so I built a standing desk of this old scrap lumber. So again, I hope I'm not mangling this name. Daivu, is it harder for international students to look for internships, jobs, and are there extra processes we need to do? Did anyone run into this experience?
So I am not a international student, but I interned with an international student, and he explained to me that the process depends on what company you're looking to work for. A lot of the bigger companies will have their processes, they're more efficient in the sense like a lot of the times you need to have a work visa and you have to go through the government to do that. A lot of the smaller companies don't have that set up, so it can be hard to find a job at a smaller company. But yeah, in terms of making it hard, that's the only thing that he really brought up. And in terms of the extra processes, yeah, that as well. So, but again, that's his experience. So take it with a grain of salt for sure.
Yeah, actually, those of you who came out of the master's program, we have many international students. You might have seen some of your, fellow students maybe struggling. Did anyone, have experiences they might be able to share?
I know that a lot of the international students in my class, like they tended to look towards bigger companies, as Barrington said, like that may like there were more processes in place at some of those. I don't know of particular horror stories in regards to like, oh, I applied and then I wasn't able to go through with it because of whatever reason. But I know they tended to skew towards that, and it was a concern. It felt like that they were more actively searching through like the last year of that master's program than a lot of the United States citizens, where people had already had like secured right to work visas and whatnot in the US. I forget the exact terminology. So I know there were some concerns about that. I can't speak too much to a particular struggle though, beyond like bigger companies tend to have more things in place. But there's also a lot of surprise bigger companies. That's not just like, oh, it's Epic and Bethesda. Like there's a lot of like larger mobile studios looking to studios that already have international stuff, multiple branches in multiple locations that can help iron that out a little bit easier.
Yeah, and for students that, you have to sort of navigate around schedules, but our grad coordinator, David Simpkins, and former grad coordinator, Jessica Bayless, who's at Unity right now, when she comes back, they've had a lot of experience working with international students and might have some tips. And of course, the international office. So yeah, interestingly, our grad coordinators are almost kind of like international student coordinators because of the sort of difference in populations. Let's see, I've got other questions in here. Yeah, this is, as we're getting to 8:20, what do employers look for in new graduates? I don't know if this is something you're running into, and perhaps interview tips. It kind of folds back a little bit, but yeah, where do you see your companies going? Do you have some sense of, your network, what they're looking for? What's happening? What's good? What are all our students going to face in a bit?
I can take this one actually, because I just recently finished interviewing someone for an entry level position. And I'm going to talk about this kind of more broadly, but the ability to like demonstrate that you're willing to learn or that you can learn in a position is huge. There's obviously the base knowledge that you're going to need to get into a position, understanding programming if you're going to be a gameplay programmer, understanding production if you're going to be a producer. But especially for an entry level position, one of the things that I always keep my eye out for is, if we brought this person in, do they have more potential than that entry level position? And do they seem like they're interested in learning? Can they bring up past examples of, I was in this situation, had no idea what I was doing, and this is how I learned how to do it. That's typically, because I kind of see AJ's question here.
Yeah,
that's typically the best way to push that is, I ran into this situation in a project and I didn't know where to go. And this is how I went about learning that situation. This is something that's going to come up, at least in my opinion, a lot more at the interview stage than the resume stage. So I wouldn't worry about it as much there. But those are the more targeted questions that I will ask is like, do you have interest in learning? If I gave you this task and you didn't know what I was talking about, how would you react to that? Would you go pretend like you knew what you were doing and try and do it? Or would you ask me questions? Would you go find out or investigate, ask people how they did it in the past and stuff like that? That's my 2 cents at least.
Oh, that's fantastic. Sometimes I've suggested to students that if you're looking at a company that's got a skill that you haven't seen, say, pick it up, let's say, try it for a week. And if there's the interview said, I saw this on there, or I didn't have this experience. I sat down with this for a week and here's what I've done so far. Like, you can make it become true. Jinjin.
Yeah, piggybacking off of what Colin was saying, a common question I think employers ask that sort of try to gauge that is like, if you were faced with a challenge, like, what would you do? Like, they want to hear your thought process, and that's like an opportunity for you to talk about like how you would tackle it. Like, would you look online on like Stack Overflow? Like, would you talk to other people? Would you be open about the fact that you don't know and try to network like within the company to get help? All of that just shows that like you are willing to learn and you are willing to do that. And I know to AJ's message in the chat of like projects and classes can't really tell an employer any of that. So your projects definitely can. So I know there have been projects where it's like you're given a problem and like, how would you solve it? And similar to the interview question, like, did you branch out and learn a new technology in order to solve that problem? So like going to hackathons, if you have a project idea, maybe you realize as you're doing it, oh, we need this framework or this library. I don't know that. Let me look into how to do that. I know with your co-ops too, you might be given a task and they have a framework in place that you've never seen before. Like, how did you go about learning that? Were you open to learning it? Like, what did you do? So they ask a lot of questions that will kind of help guide you there, and like just be open to trying new things as you're working on projects. So then you're able to talk about that going forward.
Wants to grab the next one.
I can go a little bit on like the thing with people coming up from like in school is I agree with Collins, like that growth potential, that ability of like, is this someone who we see potential in? Is this someone who we can see grow? Not always is like an associate or a junior position the best thing immediately on the project, but I know like there was a strong desire to try and get various ways of like, how do we like look for young talent that we can then grow over time in the future, and preparing for that. So we've had conversations around the idea of like, if we bring someone in, it needs to be someone who we can see growing, who we can see like, who has tried things, who has put in experimentation work, who has, and most importantly, like is willing to take criticism. If like it can look at their own work with a critical eye. Not everything you do coming out of school is going to be perfect, but if you can look at it and someone goes like, what would you do if you had 6 more weeks on this? And being able to answer why, or like say about those things in a way that is like a growing and positive thing, not just like, well, I would have not worked with Greg because Greg sucks. It's like, well, I don't want to work with you because you're crap talking on these prior people. And a lot of that is gauging that like, what type of person are you going to be on this team? It's particularly in junior levels. It's like, can you show me you have familiarity with this? And then again, from like AJ's question, how can you learn new technologies? It's like, okay, I see that you spent like 2 projects on Unreal. You spent a project on Unity. You spent a project on Godot. God bless you. You spent like 6 months on C#. You like have tried a bunch of stuff. If you have actionable things from that you can show, that's not just, oh, I spent 6 months and nothing came of it, but like, I have these little projects. I have these little experiments. That can be like, oh yeah, you're willing to jump around and try, and kind of like a T-shaped knowledge thing. Like maybe don't do every project at school in Unity. Try out a different engine, try out different programming languages. and then use those on your resume. You won't even have to call attention to them because it'll just be like, yep, on my programming languages, I've got 4. On engines, I've got 3 separate engines there. We can like, yeah, this person is willing to learn. And that's a huge thing for junior level positions.
Others want to jump in on that question? Or move on to the next question? Yeah, let's, so as we're running out of time, so hit next question. I see from Adam, have any of you experienced the infamous crunch time? And if so, how did you manage or did continue to manage?
Yes.
Barrington?
I spent a decent
chunk.
Barrington
or
Robert can go.
Yeah, okay.
So I spent a decent chunk of time on timelines in 2019 working a lot of hours. Or even if it was a 40-hour week, I was booked. Like I couldn't have a 30-minute conversation with someone at my desk about the sports game last night. Like I needed to be heads down. That churns, that burns, it sucks. And the way, and the one of the things I had to do is like, I went to my manager, I was like, this is my situation. This isn't tenable. I know it won't be fixed tomorrow and it might not be fixed next week, but what can we start now? And paying attention to those early warning signs of crunch, track your time, figure out like, I'm having to worry about having a conversation at my desk. That's a problem because like, when am I getting home? Like, when are these things happening? So you can start raising those flags early and calling them out, and then trying to use what you have to dig your way out of it. And on the other side of it, being able to have relaxation time. Like when I started getting more help on Star Trek, when I started getting more people, like my productivity didn't go back to 40 hours. I'll be honest, like it dropped down a little bit below because I needed to recover from spending a long time just nose to the grindstone. And I communicated that with my boss and we worked. It was like, yeah, I'm going to take this big chunk of time around that 2019 holiday season off. It's like, I'm gonna take a big chunk off and I'll come back and kind of reset. It's not fun. Have things that you can, especially in work from home, have things that quickly disconnect from work. I recommend 2 different workstations so you can get up and leave. Have things that signal to your brain your workday is done. Have things that you can do that de-stress you, that isn't just like jumping into another project, because that will also crunch you up. Like have things that you can do that relax you and hold on to those. They're very important.
Yeah, Barrington, you were going to say some stuff too.
I don't have much to add from what Robert said, but for me, I've been pretty lucky. There isn't a lot of crunch at Unity just because of the products that's being developed. But there are times where I will work more than the 40-hour work week. And for me, they've been very short. There hasn't been like a lot of the crunch that you hear in industry now, where it's like 6 months straight, 120 hours every week, so you're like nonstop. But one thing that's helped me with these like short sprints, maybe like 3 or 4 days of like crunch, is I'm very diligent with setting time before and after crunch. So before crunch, I'll try to prepare myself. Maybe I'll work a couple hours less, a day or 2 before. And then after crunch, I see how long I've been working and readjust my work schedule. So then after crunch, maybe I'll work 4 hours one day and 6 hours the next. That way it's not going 8 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours a day plus 12 hours a day and going back to 8 hours. It kind of balances itself out so your body isn't overexhausted.
We got 10 minutes left. I want to grab a couple questions and
I got one last
Colin, go for it.
thought on that, Dave. Just because people are going to be funneling into like junior positions in general, you will have someone who is managing your schedule, whether it's your lead or a producer or a project manager. And there is going to be a time during that you will have a task that you do not have enough time to complete. Talk to the person who is managing your schedule. I've seen it a ton of times with junior people at this point in a production role, is that people will think they were assigned this task and this is the amount of time it's due on Monday, and they crunch, they work the weekend or something to try and get it done for Monday, and they didn't necessarily need to do that. because if they had talked to their producer or project manager or lead, they can, schedule flexible maybe. They can get them an extra day or two. So once you start getting into those roles, just make sure that like, if you're gonna crunch, it's for a reason. And there is someone who is responsible for you and your schedule, and they have buy-in on that. And don't decide that, I'm gonna crunch because this was the deadline I was given and I gotta stick to that, if that makes sense.
Other
crunch stuff, or grab a couple more questions?
Yeah, quick ad. I mean, it's a marathon, not a sprint. I think is like the best way to say it. Like, don't burn out. That's one thing that's probably not talked about enough going into a junior position. You can set yourself up to burn out really fast. So just keep an eye on it.
Also on that, you can take more time. You can negotiate a start date. Like when it comes to something coming right out of college, there is no reason to take that 2 weeks immediate. It is okay to take a little bit more time. Like you're burned out in college right now. You're working more than you will work in the industry, or that you should. Take some time. Like, and it's also okay those first few days in the industry to go like, oh wait, I gotta go home and I don't have homework. Take that. You need to recover from college as well as like recover from crunch. Like you've been crunching through this.
I wish I had that advice. I graduated with my PhD and I started at Cornell 2 days later. I never actually stopped. Don't do what I did. It was crazy. Like AJ had I want to make sure if Phil hasn't had a question. If we have enough time, then I'll jump back to AJ. Hopefully you can answer this. Applying to certain positions, let's see, which I asked for. They asked for a bit of what I'm learning this semester, like Node.js. It's a good idea it's good practice to add this, what you're learning to the cover letter.
To me, part of it is, will you be able to answer questions about that at the time of the interview? Estimate like 2 to 3 weeks to that first interview. I think in the cover letter, as a student, putting like, yeah, I'm learning some of these things and I'm excited to learn about these and then continue my learning at your job. I think that can be fine. I'd really worry about putting it on a resume until like maybe midway through that semester, when you're going to be able to answer more questions about it, or even until that semester's over. The biggest thing is anything on a resume or a cover letter is fair game to get asked about. And if you can't answer questions on it, that looks really bad for you. So think about that as you're putting that in, and be very particular if it's something that like you are learning as you move through.
Others that want to weigh in? Matt, Jinjin, Colin, Barrington? So AJ's thing. This is interesting. This comes up every now and then. The sophomores versus the juniors versus the seniors, then all of them versus the grad students. I've expanded his question a little bit. Is there competition? Do you feel, when you were going through this, that somehow it's like, wow, they're taking everything and you're competing or you're working together? The advantages and disadvantages of being, a sophomore or an early sophomore, not being a junior. I know, I have to think back. Jinjin.
I mean, it sucks, but I mean, you just got to keep going. You just got to keep at it. You just have to keep applying. Like, yeah, a lot of companies look for interns in the hopes of then transitioning them immediately into full time. But there are plenty of like, especially if you apply somewhere where they have like an intern program, you have people at different stages. Like I did an internship where we had like first years that were there, like, but you just have to keep applying and keep trying.
So any final advice, or perhaps was there a question you anticipated that you were hoping to answer? Let's start with Barrington as we wrap up.
Passion projects are key. If there's anything that I could sell to you guys, is work on a project that you're possibly passionate about. Something that's outside of classes is better if you can. If you want to take say a project in one of your classes and go above and beyond, that's great. But I always recommend looking at projects that you can work with other students, because those are some of the key things that recruiters are looking for, is seeing what you've done with your free time outside of classes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Matt, any final advice? Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I think reiterating what we were talking about with like the work-life balance is probably the best advice, especially for you guys that are transitioning from like grinding through college and working your butts off. Barrington and myself were always very much in the mindset of like work as hard as we can all the time. And it did pay off. We're very thankful for it. But I think that there's a really nice middle between like working really hard and burning out. And you want to be like somewhere in the sweet spot there. So taking that time for yourself to really even just, be mindful of like where you are in the world at that moment. I know it sounds a little cliche, but it's super good.
And Jen.
Yeah, I mean, same as everyone, just making sure you take time for yourself, balance that with your work, because there's no rush. Something that I was told a lot was just like, the work will be there tomorrow. It's okay if you don't get everything done, because you're going to wake up and it's going to still be there. And then just being able to like talk to your coworkers, try to have like friendships, just be willing to be open to people, and it's not work 100% of the time, all the time.
And Colin.
Games need support roles too. This is what I'll go with as a producer. If you are not necessarily happy doing gameplay programming or something like that, like look for the other niche things outside audio. Maybe you really enjoy engine programming or something like that, programming shaders, yada yada yada. But it takes an army to build a game, especially one at the AAA level. So don't fret if you're not loving gameplay programming, because there's plenty of other jobs out there involved in games.
Yeah, and for a shout out to Creative Industry Day for all the game students. New media students, you're expected to be there. Game students, check it out. You'd be surprised. If this is what you want to do at the Bullseye, look at the outer rings and the outer rings. That's interactive programming as well. And many of those companies do things that are games themselves. And Robert.
I know this is a college thing, but none of the panelists today said GPA once. It is okay to get a C. It's okay to get a B. You don't have to go for a 4.0 and everything. You're in college to learn, but you're also in college to grow and try new things and explore. Expand your knowledge, take a bunch of different lessons, try stuff. And it's okay to prioritize. It's okay to do something more interesting to you at the cost of maybe you don't fit the rubric as well, but you're really happy of what that thing is and you can show it off better, and that's who you are. That is huge. Just like in work, you have so much expression. In college, you can often feel like you're stuck and like you have to do all of these little things. It's okay to breathe. It's okay to breathe in college. Like take your time, relax, and just like let it happen. Enjoy the experience, because you're only in college, well, as many times as you keep going back for degrees, but you're only there to you're there to learn, and there's so much more to learn than just what's in the classroom and just what you get graded on.
I think
that's one more thing.
Oh yeah, please.
What Robert said is one of my regrets in college. So definitely listen to Robert. Like, that's really key. Your GPA isn't everything. Your knowledge is very important, and yourself as well. The other thing, when you're in work, another thing that I really regret is not asking questions. Don't feel afraid to ask. You don't have to be that, you don't have to seem like that person that knows everything. That's not how it works. Be okay with asking questions and not seeming like you know everything. It definitely helps.
Also fantastic advice. Yeah, I'm a civil engineer still leading a game and new media group, and I'm still learning. I didn't study any of this. Zero. So yeah, thanks to Lindsay Herkimer, Nuha, for really getting this thing going. Our Student Success Task Force. I see Tony, I missed Travis earlier. Shout out to all our alumni. Please do stay in touch, and thanks for doing this. This is I really appreciate it. please, everyone, stay in touch, stay safe. And we'll end here. So thanks again, everybody.